reach out and press the button. Hello, everyone. I'm David March, and this is the Land of Confusion show. And today we have a bit of my co-host Don, who normally would be here, has been unfortunately been waylaid by life, and I'm sure he'll explain to you what happened with him in the future episode. But right now we're just kind of going ahead. I've been fortunate that Richard Easton, who's been a past guest of the show, has come in to volunteer at the last minute to fill in for Don. Hi, Richard.
Hey there.
Today we're speaking to KIRKIAN Wanderer, who has decided to, she doesn't want to have her face blown all over the place lest she be attacked by left-wing trolls at her university, I believe.
Yeah. Don't get kicked out of my grad program before I start.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Don't worry, we've done this on more than one occasion where we've had people not want to do it. Arahant just doesn't have a camera. That's his excuse. So I'm going to, before we get into, I sent a copy of your bio to Richard here, but before we get that, we do have a couple members' questions from our group that we're going to ask before we get going. Omega Paladin asks, how did you come to choose KIRKIAN Wanderer as your name?
Well, I joined Ricochet in a little bit of a whim, but I knew from the start that I wasn't going to use my real name. Russell Kirk was someone who had been important to me in my journey to conservatism, and I go to school abroad, I travel a lot, so KIRKIAN Wanderer.
And his other question is, how did you get so interested in Russia?
Well, it was about 50% deliberate interest and just 50% stumbling into it. I was kind of always fascinated with history and, you know, the Cold War was part of that, and Russia and communism, and also Russian literature. And then when I got to university in our first week of orientation, they offered us the chance basically to go from doing a history degree to a history with language degree. And I initially planned on doing German, but because it's so popular as an A-level here, they don't offer level 1. So then I was stuck choosing between Chinese and Russian, and my Taiwanese friend told me that Chinese was going to kill me. So I went with Russian.
Okay. Richard, do you have any opening questions?
I assume from your bio that you went to high school in the U.S. and college in the U.K. Can you compare
Unknown caller.
This is like modern times. Let me turn this off.
No problem.
But I tell Biden he has to fend for himself during this hour. And Kamala just laughed hysterically when I gave her advice. But at any rate, what's the environment for conservatives? How would you compare it in the UK versus the US?
I think it's quite specific based on the university. I'm at LSC, which it has a reputation for being radical, but it's not one the students really live up to. You know, everyone talks about communism and not so much critical race theory, but, you know, socialism, social justice, and then everybody goes off and joins Goldman Sachs and makes, you know, £1 million and kind of perpetuates the system. And I think there's a very strong, somewhat underground conservative movement, and especially because LSE prides itself so much on having Nobel Prize winners and the absolute best economists you can find. They'll employ anyone as long as they've got good credentials. So a lot of the departments are pretty 50-50, and if you know who you're talking to, you can say what you want. I'm not entirely sure, except by reputation, how it is in the US. I'm from Massachusetts, so I'm used to things being very, you know, left-wing liberal.
It does seem to be getting a bit worse. I remember a few years ago, a friend of mine being the first, she was a really cool girl. And then she went to get her master's degree in sociology, and then that was the first. And the next time I ran into her, she called me a cisgendered white male, and I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about. And she was like the first person I know who ended up going down the critical race theory woke agenda. It was like how does this compute? But
yeah, your comment about LSE kind of reminds me of one of my teachers at the University of Chicago who made a reference to 9 to 5 Marxists. You know, some of the professors are Marxists and then they go off on their boat. So, you know, it's like billionaires with their private jets telling us to reduce our CO2 emissions.
I think when people ask about LSE in the US too, it's the British University of Chicago, basically. There's a lot of parallel.
But yeah, it's almost 40 years ago, but the yes minister, they had a joke where, you know, I think the minister graduated from LSE, and, you know, the Oxford civil servant made a crack about that. So
yeah, so. He had a third from LSE, which is like the worst degree you can get.
Yep. Yeah, I remember that show having that one episode where it's like, I can't help but notice that the drive to Oxford from Parliament is really quick, but the drive from here to Cambridge is terrible. It's like, well, the Minister of Transportation is from Oxford.
Yeah.
So you've looking at your here, you have a lot of languages under your belt. How did you? Are you just is that something of interest to you, or is that something that you've kind of developed over time, like a natural linguist, or?
I was always interested in languages. I mean, the town I'm from is the middle of nowhere. We didn't really have any language programs. I tried to teach myself Latin in 6th grade and then Hebrew in 7th. But once we were able to, you know, do stuff a little bit more professionally in high school, I really kind of grabbed onto French. And then when I got here, because the language programs in the UK are so good, you know, kind of did whatever I could. So at LSE, I did Russian, and basically the intent of the program here, it's very intensive, but you start with nothing, and by 3rd year, which is where I am, you're supposed to be fluent. So, you know, you learn the alphabet in the first week, and then it kind of gets worse from there. And I decided to do Arabic because it's an important strategy language at SOAS, and Hebrew partly from personal interest and partly because I always thought it would be useful professionally too.
Yeah, I have my own interest in Russian. Basically, I was writing for a World War II magazine, and I said to my boss, "So what more articles do you need?" And he says, "We need more stuff on the Eastern Front from the Russian perspective." I'm like, okay. But, I don't speak or read it. I just read the books that are translated in English. Richard, you got a follow-up?
Oh, how did you see, so you're in Massachusetts, Boston area or the hinterlands?
The hinterlands.
Did you see any change as you went through school there? I mean, presumably if you're a senior now, you graduated from high school 4 years ago, where some of the ideas of critical race theory might have been out there, but not as fully developed. Did you see any you know, that creeping into history or social science when you were in high school?
Yeah, I graduated 3 years ago because undergraduate degrees are 3 years in the UK, but I don't think there's a big difference between 3 and 4 years. I was mostly doing AP courses, which I think sometimes they're on the front edge of things, but a lot of times they really lag behind because it's all tied to standardized testing. We were very much still in kind of the Howard Zinn thing universe. I'm sure it's only gotten more so since then, and also because Massachusetts standards tend to go that way.
Was it more of a more alarmism from environmentalism? I remember talking to a girl about 5 or 6 years ago who was a daughter of a roommate of mine, and she was basically saying that she's like I was driving her somewhere to school, and she looked outside and was like, I'm going to miss these trees when they're gone in 20 years. I'm like, what?
I don't think there really was a ton, because Massachusetts has the MCAS program, which is you basically have to pass this very intensive series of standardized tests for math, science, and English. So the science curriculum is it's good. I think it's very focused just on the science. Some of the more free choice stuff, I think, might be a little bit more influenced by that. And you really wouldn't see it in math or any of the hard sciences. No, history was, what you would expect, and there might have been a little bit of it in one of our AP English courses, but that was partly just because the teacher was very left wing.
Well, so have you done your full 3 years at LSC, or did you do is this like an exchange program through a different school?
No, I made a weird choice and did my whole undergraduate degree in the UK.
So at least because I saw you mention it in the pit. For those on Ricochet who don't know the pit, it's basically, we've done a few episodes on the show about it, and it's basically one long drawn out thread that never ends until someone from the admin comes in and says, we need to end this and you can start a new one. It's usually around 20, I think it's right. The current one's around 20,000 messages, just to give people an idea. And you're a frequent visitor of the pit. So when you mentioned that you had been stuck in your dorm for the last year, I was just feeling like, oh my God, I was worried you might have just done 2 years, went through an exchange program, and then have spent all of your time in England in your room.
Yeah, we got lucky to an extent, because we did last March, we went online, but we only had 2 weeks of school left. And then we were in full lockdown, which was basically you can leave once a day to get food or exercise, and otherwise you're in your room. A lot of people just went to whatever country they were actually from. I stayed, and then by June we were back to normal. July I went back to the US, and by the time I came back, I quarantined, and school starts late for us, like the 29th of September. And they said by the time I get out, we're going back into lockdown on the 4th of November. So I got to live a little, and then we went straight back into lockdown. And we started the permanent path out of lockdown about a month ago. So now close to normal. They're saying everything's supposed to go completely back to normal on the 21st of June. Yet to be seen.
When you had the initial lockdown, all right, so you're allowed out once a day. Were people wearing masks when they were just walking around parks?
We didn't really have mask rules for a long time. I don't think until fall of this year, and there never were a lot about wearing them outside. It was always really about wearing them inside, so you wouldn't see a ton of it. I mean, I was still doing school, so I was going out at like 11 o'clock at night to run for 2 hours, so I wasn't seeing a lot of people to begin with.
Yeah, because I live close to William and Mary, and they had rules for the longest time that anywhere in the campus you were supposed to be wearing a mask. And, the CDC finally admitted a couple of weeks ago that they'd misinterpreted a study, and they were overestimating the risk being outside by about a factor of 100. So, I mean, it was pretty obvious to me that they were being way too conservative, but like all good government entities, they weren't willing to explain or fess up to an error. And I wondered to what extent you had equivalent idiocy abroad.
our campus was entirely shut down in March of last year. You just couldn't get onto it at all.
Yeah.
But this year, it's only really in the buildings that you need to wear masks. But you also, like if I want to go return library books, I need to get a COVID test first and have it be negative before I can actually go into a building.
I mean, do people realize that college kids are far more at risk from seasonal flu than they are from COVID? I mean, that basic fact has been obvious for at least a year, and yet our experts have been pretending that's not the case. I know, again, William and Mary, they have the requirement in the fall that all teachers and faculty, I mean, all students and faculty get vaccinated. But people like my wife had COVID. Vaccination has no benefits and has risks. And you know, our obviously this is your program, so I'll try to shy away from my rants. But it seems, at least based on not unbiased sources, Toby Young and James Dellingpole, that the authorities in the UK are possibly even more insane than they are in the US.
Well, certainly I have never seen anyone have to take a PCR test to enter a building here. And again, in Canada, we haven't had PCR tests available commercially till a month ago.
Well, and of course, the PCR tests have been grossly misused, misapplied.
Yeah.
I think LSC is using the rapid and the PCR. They're only having us use the PCR if you're doing international travel. It's the rapid to go into buildings.
Sorry, I meant the rapid test. Sorry. But yeah. Like my ex-girlfriend lives in Germany and she'll spout off on Facebook about things. And I'd be like, how are you getting that stuff? We don't have anything like that here. So yeah. What is it like when going to school in the United Kingdom when it is not as crazy as it has been the last year?
I enjoyed it a lot. Obviously I didn't do any college in the US, so I'm not sure how much I can compare except from what friends have said. But I think they're much more just kind of sending you out to do it, expecting you to be your own adult. I remember the first course I ever sat in a lecture for was IR 100, International Relations 100. And the professor actually turned out to be American, but he kind of told us from day one, every week you're going to have about 500 pages of reading. At least a quarter of it is going to be graduate school level. And the intent of this, we want you to absorb the information, but we also intend, you chose to come to LSE, we expect that within the next 5 years, you're going to be working a desk in diplomacy, you're going to be trying to make your way to junior partner at a law firm or an investment bank, you're going to be leading your field in some kind of research. So we want you to be able to consume big amounts of information, draw conclusions, summarize, that kind of thing. So it's a little bit intimidating to start, but I like that they had that kind of, adult faith in people to do that. And it's also, I'm in kind of a weird place as an American because there aren't a lot of American undergraduate students. And the ones that are here all really come from places like Phillips, Exeter, and Andover, very expensive prep schools, and they tend to be in the econ or finance departments. So they, I don't really make friends with them because they come from a completely different culture than I do. So as the American, you kind of make friends with everybody from every country. There's just not a lot of us.
Yeah, you were mentioning, I was just going over your bio again. So you mentioned here, you dance. What kind of dance do you do?
My parents started me doing dance when I was 2.5, and I did a lot of different kinds all through high school. Now I mostly do point, which is like the ballet where you stand on your toes in the special shoes. Yeah. And modern contemporary.
Okay. Got a follow-up there, Richard?
I'm sorry?
Do you have another question for her?
How do the students feel about Brexit?
That's a good question.
A good proportion of the students are from mainland Europe, so they, kind of have different opinions than the British students. Within the conservative society, I would say it leaned more towards being pro-Brexit, and from general student body, I think it was more anti. Honestly, it's kind of faded into the background with everything that's happened. It was something people talked a lot more about in my first year of school, and with COVID and everything else, and also changing prime ministers like 3 times in the space of a year. It's kind of faded into the background.
Okay. Yeah, it's just kind of interesting to think about that kind of stuff. That we're all so focused on. I remember everything that was going on right before COVID broke down, and we were also focused on all these interesting issues. And then suddenly, it all stopped, and we all got locked into this never-ending saga. So, but you mentioned the Conservative Union. So, are you an active participant in the?
Yeah, we're doing more when you can actually meet in person. And actually, Matt Hancock, who's the health secretary and handles most of the COVID stuff, was the one minister who would show up all the time for speeches. So we saw a lot of him. It's kind of funny. It's a different social environment here, because you would go to see these, see someone speak and ask questions in one of the buildings after classes had ended. And I remember someone in the back just throwing him a Stella and him, opening it. It's kind of informal and a lot of drinking culture kind of thing.
Yeah. It's much the same here. But I understand it hasn't been that way in the US for a while. I had a friend who used to go to CPAC in the 80s. And he said that what would happen is Reagan would force all the secretaries to go down, the cabinet secretaries to go down and do Q&As. And you wouldn't see that today.
Yeah, my question about Brexit, I follow mainly space people on Twitter and conservatives, but the space people, a fair number are in the UK, and they all tend to be pretty far left. So I'm not getting an unbiased sample, but they don't tend to praise Brexit.
You need to do what I do. Watch. Is it London Broadcasting or whatever it is? There's I follow a guy on a lot of videos from a guy named Mike Graham, who's a radio show guy and does YouTube videos from UK.
Of course, people comment that the UK newspapers oftentimes have stories that are not PC in the US. So you have the bizarre situation that the foreign papers are better than Pravda USA.
Yeah. So you also mentioned, I can see, and though no one else will see this after when this goes live on the site, but you have a large harp behind you. You're a harp player. How did you get into that?
Yeah, I started when I was 9. I think my parents wanted me to do something like a lot of parents pick an instrument. And we had seen an orchestra performance, and I liked the harp, so I just happened to be able to find someone about half an hour away from where my mom teaches, who was I think she taught music at a Seventh-day Adventist school, and then she offered private lessons kind of after the school day was over. So I did that all the way through high school, and then bought this. It's actually, it's a miniature harp. It's pretty small, only 2 scales.
Yeah.
But, yeah. I got it at an early music shop here, so I could still work. It's actually, this is kind of the best place in my apartment for Wi-Fi, but it came back to get me because one of my Russian teachers saw it and demanded a performance of Russian songs. I had a week to learn something and please her, and she is not a woman to be pleased by anything.
What do you like most about Russian?
I think probably the literature associated with it and the poetry, because it was something I liked going in, but you get even more of a feel for it when you start learning the language, because it is such a musical language. It's like a case-based language like Latin. And yeah, there's definitely still stuff about it that I don't like. And we had 3 different teachers, all of about the same age, and they came out of a very typical Soviet education system of learn by being verbally abused. You know, you get used to that over 3 years.
So what is it? Dance, paint. You're also a boxer?
Yeah, I do Muay Thai, which is it's a Thai style of boxing. Basically, you use your legs and your hands.
Yep. I did Taekwondo when I was your age, but that was a long time ago, sadly for me.
Yeah, I know there are some people from the LSE team that have gone to Thailand and become pro or semi-pro, but I do not think my parents would be thrilled if I leveraged my history degree into being a fighter in Thailand.
Well, look at Dolph Lundgren, who went on to be like the bad guy in Rocky and a whole bunch of movies, do a whole bunch of movies. He has like a master's degree in chemical engineering. So it's weird what you can end up doing when you're when you decide to change careers. Any ideas there, Richard?
I have a funny thing. This is my father was involved in the space program, as anyone who reads me is probably sick of hearing. But I remember a few years ago with a coworker, I was talking about Werner von Braun, and this person who was probably 6 or 7 when von Braun died, had no idea who he was. So at that point, I started to feel old. But there's been a lot of, in space circles, there's been a lot of chat about today being, this year being the 60th anniversary of the first human in space. And do your friends follow things like SpaceX or ULA? I mean, the super heavy, the potential launches, when they had the Falcon Heavy, let's see, that was 3 years ago. So maybe you hadn't started yet, but do people in your circle follow the latest developments in the space program?
I have some friends that do at home, mostly people that are more in the hard sciences. I do have a friend that does Russian with me that follows it too, but mostly because part of her specialism as a historian is the space race.
Mm-hmm.
It is kind of, charting developments and comparing what happens there to what Russia is trying to do now.
Should definitely hook you up with a friend of mine, Richard. He's trying to pitch a TV miniseries for Netflix about the Russian space program.
Yes, well, obviously one of my claims to fame is being right next to the oldest piece of space junk out there, Vanguard 1. So no clean rooms in 1958. So.
They made things more robust back then, so you didn't really need.
Well, they were having problems with some of the solar cells because Vanguard 1 was the first one to have a transmitter powered by solar cells. But once they got it in orbit, it worked for 6 years, whereas Explorer 1, the first American satellite, the batteries ran for about 4 months. So the Green New Deal may work if we were all in space and the sun is shining all the time.
Yeah. I would love to see space solar power satellites, but I don't think that's what the Green New Deal people want.
No, well, a large percentage are yes. No, and I heard somebody saying, well, in space, they've had the Green New Deal for decades. Well, yeah, you don't have clouds, you don't have, it's a whole different environment, much more conducive to solar than is the case in the US.
Mhm.
So that's one thing too I've seen recently. This huge, when you're flying, you see like in middle of Indiana, these huge wind farms. And I've heard that people in the UK who are anywhere near the wind farms are complaining about the noise. I realize LSE is in London, but have you had a chance to get out much in the countryside before lockdown?
I have had that, and also I visited senior year of high school and made to look at different schools and made the very poor choice to take a bus from London to St. Andrews University in Scotland. So I've seen more than I wanted to of the countryside, between a drunk guy in a dress singing show tunes and a guy that was throwing up. It was a fun 10 hours.
That sounds like Scotland.
Right bound for home. I don't think I ever saw any of those, but I have heard people who are from those kind of areas complaining of the same issues, and also how they kill a lot of birds.
Yeah. Well, there's a real problem with what do you do with them? I mean, and of course, the wind turbines don't come out of thin air. There's a lot of fossil fuels needed. So the whole term renewable is a myth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you mentioned in your bio that you have been a conservative all your life. Do you come from a conservative family, or are you just kind of this weird offshoot like me? Or
yeah, my mom is, but not really focused on it. And my dad was the kind of person who listened to Howie Carr, who's like a local Massachusetts conservative guy, and Glenn Beck, and all that stuff. So I kind of grew up around that, listening to that, especially since he's self-employed. So instead of putting me in daycare, I just kind of followed him around to construction sites as a kid, sat in the car and listened to that, which I'm sure did interesting things for my development.
Yeah, I enjoy listening to Howard Carr when I go up to New Hampshire. So he's very funny. So it wasn't one or two books, it was more.
I think when I got a little bit older, I can remember at like 8 or 9, I think we were going around the room talking about political candidates, and it would have been Obama's first election, saying to the teacher, I know Mitt Romney, I'm gonna vote for him. No, but when I got a little bit older, especially Russell Kirk and Bill Buckley, really were the people I came to, and Buckley helped me to find a lot of other people I would be influenced by.
And my wife talked to Obama for about 15 minutes in 1996-ish in her office at WBEZ. And she said he was both charismatic and he was also about the fakest person she's ever seen in her life. So at that time, I was living in Chicago, and to conservatives in Chicago, nothing about us surprised him. I remember Rush Limbaugh talking about that, the man who died recently had been a speechwriter for Mondale and then became conservative. I'm having a senior moment.
yeah.
At any rate, I'm sorry?
Charles Krauthammer?
Yes,
Yeah.
Krauthammer. He was, he and a bunch of other conservatives had dinner with Obama shortly before he became president. And then about 2 months after January 20th, he wrote a column about how he was so surprised at how radical Obama had been. And Rush was saying, didn't you see anything during the nomination and the campaign? And he was going on, and he said, oh, my staff just brought me a copy of Krauthammer's latest book with a nice signature to me. So he was laughing. I'd just been lambasting this guy who had a very nice gesture sending me his book. But yeah, it was amazing, the optimism about Obama versus those of us who knew a bit more about him. So
yeah, I remember watching Uncommon Knowledge and had Richard Epstein on right after Obama got elected, and Epstein, of course, had been working with him as both Obama's a lecturer and at the Chicago, and Epstein is a professor, and he's like, yeah, this guy's really radical. I don't know what anyone thinks that this guy's going to be like a moderate at all. Like, this is going to be a real fun time for us.
Well, and one of my friends, Milt Rosenberg, had Obama on, a longtime University of Chicago professor who had a radio program on WGN, not a bomb thrower, but twice during the campaign, Obama's campaign went after him for daring to have a conservative on and tried to shut it down, where some of Obama's campaign staff had worked for the Chicago Tribune. So, and Milt said that had never happened before. So a lot of these people's radicalism, should have been anticipated, but obviously the media does what it needs to get these people elected. It seems like conservatives have been really disappointed with Boris Johnson. Is that your view as our woman in London?
Yeah, I think I might have come into it with less faith in Boris than people in the US have, because I think people in the US saw more of the big picture, kind of bombastic Boris, but he got in with a better majority than anyone thought he would, and basically said from day one that he really wasn't going to do anything very Thatcherite. He was going to kind of follow on the David Cameron path. And I think the thing with Boris that people don't really realize, if you look at someone like Michael Gove, who's a little bit less well known in the US, he came from a very similar background to Thatcher of, pulling himself up from a middle class family and going to Oxbridge, where Boris Johnson is from kind of the same set as David Cameron. We went to Eton, we went to the same Oxbridge colleges, we did the same kind of internships. So there was really more similarities with him and I'm blanking on the name for the particular wing of the Conservative Party, but basically that kind of noblesse oblige wing of the Tory party, which is more unique to England because of the landed gentry and the whole history of that and that association with conservatism here.
Or perhaps Tory wets.
Yeah,
that might be another term.
Well, Peter Hitchens, I think I put it best. The purpose of the Conservative Party is to get the second sons of bankers jobs.
Yeah.
Or as Mark Stein, driving the US into bankruptcy a year or two later than the leftists would do it.
That being said, Boris has been pretty good on Brexit. So he chose one of the issues that he wanted to be. Knew that he was going to be absolutely tough on, and has delivered more than anyone else thought. I mean, there's the problems with Northern Ireland, but it looks like he got real Brexit through. So
what was the biggest couple areas of culture shock actually being a student in the UK?
Well, part of it was just for me moving. I lived my whole life in the same place, and it's a very small town. So moving to a big city, It was really, really different. And also the accessibility of the rest of Europe from here. Because we're used to, you know, US sized distances. And then here you can take a train to Paris and be there in 2 hours. I think I was lucky to an extent because I had always been interested in England. So I wasn't flying completely blind and coming. I knew about the politics and some basic cultural stuff. And I had also actually had a couple teachers from England in high school. I knew a little bit from them. Yeah, part of it really for the first couple months, you're just so insulated with university work that you're getting used to that. And you can't really tell how different that is from everything else that's going on around. And London is such an international city that I think it's very different than if you're planted somewhere like Oxford or Cambridge, where you're really in England.
Yeah. This is an ancient era, but first time I was in England was 1974. And at that point, to call long distance, you had to make a reservation. And, you know, they would get around to it in a couple hours. We spent some time with the head of the time division at the Royal Observatory. And I just remember being astounded at that. And of course, now, you know, calling international is free. Whereas I remember a friend in college, her parents were missionaries in the Far East. I think they were in Thailand. And, you know, it was $5 a minute, thank you, in 1975 dollars. So.
And here we are in 2021 having a conversation over cameras here via our living rooms for essentially free. So you've gotten, you came to Ricochet, as you said, and got involved in something we call the pit. Can you tell us a little bit about your experiences dealing with the pit?
Sure. Era Hunt dragged me into the pit about a year ago. I knew nothing about it before then. He kind of directed me that way to the music pit and then to there. And it's, a lot of people who are in the pit will describe it as basically the Cheers of Ricochet, which I think is a very good description. It's, you know, a lot of people sitting around having different conversations about stuff that is political and isn't political. You kind of develop, you know, running jokes, get to know people. People that have been, most of the people in the pit have been there way longer than I have, but people who have been in the pit since I joined have kind of watched my whole progression of applying to graduate school, taking the GRE, waiting to get results, getting, you know, rejection letters, acceptance letters and stuff. And you see that with a lot of people. It's nice in a way. You follow along with people's personal lives and just stuff that's going on. It's good. It has a little bit of a fearsome reputation and it can get weird, but I think it's also nice.
Yes, I remember showing up one time and they were all talking about sex robots.
Oh yeah, that happens every couple days. You get used to it. You just ignore it. Yeah. Yeah, I get made fun of a lot. I think Era Hunt might have mentioned it on one of the previous episodes about the pit for the food I cook. Because I'll post every once in a while my groceries for the week or stuff, or what I'm making for dinner. And I eat a lot of very authentic East Asian and Middle Eastern cuisine. So, you know, I come home with chicken feet and tofu and stuff, and they're horrified. Just like my parents.
Well, it's good to have like various things to be to expand your taste when you're in school like that. Give you a chance to really do other things. You also mentioned like your fondness for Russell Kirk. So, what attracts you to his particular ideology of conservatism, his landed farmers focus?
I think I've moved away from his brand of conservatism in particular since I got older, but I always have a certain amount of fondness for him as someone that brought me to so many different thinkers. Nowadays, and really since I've been, you know, in high school, closer to the F.A. Hayek libertarian wing, but I think his book still is really one of the best primers on conservative thought that you can find. Anglo-American conservative thought, really, because otherwise it doesn't quite make a coherent ideology.
Yeah, my political mentor person that kind of got me into being a conservative is a guy named Jerry Purnell, and he always described himself as a student of Russell Kirk's, and I guess he went to he got his BA under him. So it's been a long time since we've had a real public intellectual who is considered in the top 20 that was on the right, and of course Russell Kirk was in that kind of thing. Have you ever heard about some of his private life?
Yeah, very interesting. It goes to macabre stuff and all of that. Yeah.
His wife and he had started adopting children, and their actual children like, who are all these people you're bringing into our house? Like, you just picked up these strays anywhere.
Oh, I remember two of the people that I got interested in later on and did some projects on were Eilidh Kettery and Kenneth Minogue. And Minogue was this very interesting guy, born in Australia, and decided when he was 18 that he wanted to be an economist. So he jumped on some kind of barge and worked all over the Near East and stuff until he got to England, and then enrolled at the LSE and became an economist. And I can't remember exactly the book, but it was something that was published every year for significant figures in England. And he listed his hobbies as wine, women, and song.
That's a good hobby to have.
Yeah.
How about you, Richard? Do you have any particular favorite among conservative intellectuals that you follow?
Oh, I don't know that you call him an intellectual. I mean, Mark Stein, I like a lot.
I certainly think he is.
Yeah. And, Milt Rosenberg was a good friend of ours, and I've never met Mark, but Mark was a good friend of Milt's. And when Milt got booted from WGN after almost 40 years there, he started a podcast, and Mark was on the first podcast. And when he landed with a much lower watt radio station, Mark was on that. So one thing that, in addition to writing a lot about immigration, which is one of the major issues that a fair bit of the Republican Party would prefer not to touch. Mm-hmm. Mark was obviously a good friend because he didn't need the publicity of being on Milt's show. And he's also very, very funny. Even though the jokes are a little dated, his November 2008 talk to the Federalist Society, you can find it on C-SPAN, it is just hilarious. Yeah,
he did a live show here in Canada once, which I went to see.
Yeah. Well, we were stalkers because my parents lived in New Hampshire, and we thought that he lived in a certain town because that's where he had a P.O. box. It turns out he's about 40 miles north of it, but my wife and I were trying to figure out where he lived. And we weren't very good spies because we couldn't find it, but it turned out we were, like I said, about 40 miles off. So
yeah. You mentioned Milton Rosenberg a couple of times. I remember when I first joined Ricochet, they were hosting his podcast here. And I remember listening to a few of his episodes. And one time he had this guy on who was very much, definitely liberal Democrat, very big believer in climate change. And you say he's not a bomb thrower, but Milt did not believe in climate change. And about 20 minutes in, he's like, this guy's spouting off. And then Milt just kind of reveals that he's like one of those anti-intellectual conservatives to this guy. And this guy's like, what? Where am I? What's going on here?
Yeah. Well, you get it sometimes too, where people can't believe that someone with your opinions is in the environment that you are. So yes, Milt was a fearless one, and you'd hear endless people calling in because he he'd gone from he'd gone from liberal to conservative, particularly with the first Clinton administration. And you'd have endless callers. I mean, WGN, yeah, a fair bit of sports talk, but of the other programs, Milt was about the only conservative there was, and yet people would complain endlessly that sometimes it'd just be Milt, or you'd have someone like Mark Stein, and they'd say there's not balance, but of course they didn't mind the other side. So that's one thing. I was having an argument. Actually, my wife was having an argument with my brother, who's very liberal. And he said, well, you folks just read Free Republic. And what some liberals don't seem to understand is we know the liberal arguments. Even if we don't watch the nightly news, they're just so prevalent that we can't escape from them. Whereas frequently I find liberals don't know conservative arguments. And do you see that in the UK? It sounds like LSE, there's a good mixture, and you don't have, it doesn't appear that you have the speech codes that vex some universities. Is it pretty freewheeling at LSE?
Yeah, it depends a little bit on the professor, but you can generally tell right out of the gate what you're going to get and who, or what you can say in front of who. And I think especially with the economics professors and the ones that are a little, farther outside of the humanities, they're pretty open to anything. The history department's a little bit more mixed.
So you mentioned you're not haven't yet to take in concentration in your studies. What area do you think you are going to concentrate on if you have your choice?
I'm not entirely sure yet. I think whatever area I end up in, it's probably going to be pretty focused on intellectual history and economic history, because that's something I did a good amount of at LSE, especially the history of banking and finance and why and how that develops practically and ideologically.
Yeah, I remember a few years ago, I was watching a thing on Heritage YouTube channel, and they were talking about the American banking system and why it would fail on occasion, how many banking failures. And they put up this chart, and they're like, here's all the banking failures that happened in the United States over the years. And see that little green line down there? That's all the banking failures that happened in Canada. And we'll be talking about that at the Q&A at the end. And then they finally get to the end of the show. I'm like, oh, finally I'm going to find out what's going on, why the difference. And it's like, doot, they cut the Q&A off. It's like, oh.
Yeah, I got the opportunity to take a very neat course last year that was the history of banking and finance from 400 to present. So it was, a little bit older, and my specialty was more in bills of exchange and basically why, with usury laws, why banking even developed in the first place and how it developed the way it did, which is also connected to some extent to my interest in Jewish history, so it all kind of ties together nicely.
Well, we should do something on the Templars. Yeah. They're my favorite bankers in the world, where, of course, the king says, well, I don't want to pay you off, so I'm just going to declare you all heretics and take your money.
Oh, that's a good strategy.
Well, we're coming up on an hour here. Do you have a question we should end on there, Richard?
What has surprised you the most about the Biden presidency?
I probably haven't been following it as closely as I should have. I don't know that there's anything that surprised me in particular. I'll be interested to see how the meeting he's supposed to have with Putin in a little while goes. I can't imagine it's going to be different from what any other American president in the last 20 years has done. I don't think anyone's really found their effective strategy against him, or if there really is one. But otherwise, I don't think he's done any radical departures that I didn't expect. And to some extent, I don't know how in control of his presidency he really is. I think he's kind of at the mercy of Joe Manchin and what's going on in Congress.
Well, and of all the preposterous conspiracy theories, the one that struck me as the most preposterous was that Putin wanted Donald Trump to be president when Donald Trump, was for drilling, and Putin, so much of Putin's foreign exchange depends on a high value of the cost of fossil fuels. So Trump was inimical to that, whereas Biden and Obama, by restricting pipelines, et cetera, were in a sense Russia's greatest friends. So I'm used to the left spouting nonsense, but that struck me as particularly preposterous. So
I think it's funny in a way to see it all come in the end to Biden and Putin, just because it's really a Cold War rehash, the KGB agent, versus the senator that's been around since time.
Well, and of course they say Kennedy in June of 61, part of the problem he had was that, besides the Bay of Pigs, was that he had difficulty sitting for long periods of time. His back was so bad. So he was in agony. Whereas I don't think Joe will be in agony because I'm not sure if he knows he's there. So
well, that's a good way to kind of end the stream on a joke at the president's expense, I think. I want to thank you both for coming in at the last minute there, Richard, to help me out with because of Dawn's absence. And I want to thank you, KIRKIAN Wanderer, for coming in and giving us a little bit of a window into the UK and your life. And so thanks for both of you for coming in like this.
Thank you. Thanks for hosting this.
Okay, well, I'll see you guys in the comments.
Sounds good.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, bye.